All right, I see we're 3 minutes after, and we have just under 100 participants signed on, which is about halfway there from those that registered. So I think we've got a critical mass now that we can get moving, and I'm sure others will continue to join us as we get started. I just want to say thank you to all of our participants today, and in particular, I'd like to thank BioTalent Canada and Shift Health, who really worked closely with us to help us organize this event. Obviously, we are in unprecedented times with COVID-19, and it's created some real challenges for our sector from the perspective of just our everyday work environment, but in particular for young professionals that are finishing their degrees, entering the workforce, and trying to get their careers started in this sector. So we thought it would be timely to share with you some of the things that are happening to help support young professionals, and maybe provide some insights into some of the best practices that are occurring within the sector and how the industry is responding to the current environment. I'll let everyone know that's on the line. If you have questions at any time during this session, please type them into your chat box. And those of you that are watching along and seeing questions that you would like to see answered, you can actually vote those questions up. So the more you vote them up, the higher they will appear. And Rob Henderson from BioTalent Canada is going to start things off with a presentation about a new program from BioTalent Canada. And then he's going to moderate a session, a panel session with the individuals that we have on board. He's going to introduce everyone. So I'm going to stop rambling on here now and hand it off to Rob. So Rob, over to you to tell us about this very exciting new program from BioTalent Canada.
Thanks, Jason. I just want to thank both Life Sciences Ontario and Shift Health for providing this forum for us to talk about a couple of very, very timely topics. I really enjoyed the way this whole session was going to be framed, which is opportunities in uncertain times, because certainly with the two topics that we're sort of circling around here tonight, they really do create opportunities. Not only opportunities for job seekers and for students to find their careers, new careers in life sciences, but also opportunities for companies to improve their systems, to take a good hard look at themselves and to make sure that they're operating by the best HR practices, that they're accessing the programs, the funding, and the economic opportunities that have changed our landscape, really. So I'm going to start off with a little presentation. BioTalent Canada, as many of you know, is in the wage subsidy business. And the landscape in that has changed. So we're going to start with that. And then I'll introduce our panelists right after that to talk about opportunities that they have seen and some of the employment challenges and the employment changes and shifts that their companies have seen. We also have a student among us as well. So we'll talk about a real life experience in terms of finding and keeping a job within Canada's bioeconomy. And then we'll also shift a little gears after that. And we'll talk a little bit about the unprecedented times that have been presenting themselves, the time of social unrest where diversion and inclusion, the concepts of systemic racism within companies and possibly pervasive within entire industries has reared its ugly head, and how companies in our industry as a whole has dealt with those topics. So let's start. I'll take hopefully no more than 10 minutes because I want to get to the panelists, the real experts, as soon as we can, but maybe this will be able to frame a few of the new opportunities that are presenting themselves. So we deal in human resources and biotechnology, skills profiles, national occupational standards. I gotta say it can get a little dry because some of that stuff is just lists. It's all about conforming to legislation and everything. So sometimes we have to take a step back and actually take a look at some of the companies and the people we help. Brian, can you put the next slide up, please? So this is a company out of Ontario. It's called BioConnect. It's out of Toronto, actually. And this is a bioidentification company that has been working with BioTalent Canada for about 5 to 7 years. They're one of those companies who is successfully pivoting in the age of COVID in terms of being able to make bioidentification machinery that is touchless and therefore safe during our infectious periods. In the last 5 to 7 years, you'll see, with the exception of Rob Graham, the CEO on your left, the broken down bald guy in the middle, and Jeff Cruz over the right, all of these people were employed by BioConnect through wage subsidies from BioTalent Canada. And what's interesting about this is BioConnect has sort of rewritten the HR logbook. And what I mean by that is that instead of trying to adapt their culture to include the idea of young people, the idea of inclusion and diversity, they've used the unprecedented access to wage subsidies as a competitive advantage to not alter their HR culture, but to rebuild it and to allow the young people and millennials that are joining their company to make it, shape it in their enthusiastic, energetic, and dynamic and socially aware architecture. They find it a competitive advantage because these are a strategically advantageous labor group. They're a huge one. The amount of unemployment, Life Sciences Ontario published a paper just a couple of years ago that showed that youth unemployment amongst biotech ranges almost 20% in Ontario alone. That's really a huge issue, and it's only gotten worse right now because of the age of COVID. So BioConnect is embracing the idea of wage subsidies and of onboarding young people to reinvigorate their workforce, not only to reinvigorate, to completely transform the company. And they've succeeded. They've grown from a company of about 40 to a company of 150 in just a few short years. And the reason why I put them up there is these are the companies you have to look for. I'm talking to you young people who are looking for employment and for internship and co-op opportunities. The companies that look, that walk the talk about, and you see within their workforce when you walk through their company or you take a look at their website, the concept of inclusion and diversity personified, and the concept of onboarding young people fresh out of college and university as part of their competitive advantage. Next slide, please. So BioTalent Canada, very briefly, we're a national not-for-profit. We're a labor market research organization at our heart. We start with science. We identify skills gaps, and then we quantify them. And once we've quantified them, then we look for partners like the federal government and provincial associations like Life Sciences Ontario to address them. So we take a very scientific aspect to our research and we make it practical. And like I said, once we've had numbers like 20% unemployment in provinces like Ontario, which represents the largest life sciences community in Canada, we have no choice but to act. But we act with numbers backing us up. Next slide, please. So BioTalent Canada is a network of about 65 different corporate partners, including organizations like LSO, organizations like Stem Cell Network, like Stem Cell Technologies out of BC, BioConnect, Synaptive Medical Therapy, et cetera, some of the fastest growing and strategically positioned HR companies across Canada. We comprise of 4 national and 10 provincial industry associations that represent Canada's bioeconomy. That gives us an unprecedented access to hundreds of companies across Canada. Indeed, it represents pretty much the largest bioeconomy network in Canada, and nobody's debated me on that. This is only part of it. The next part is where the two worlds meet. Next slide, please. Along with that, we have about 26 different academic partners across Canada. They represent some of the most active colleges and universities within the bioeconomy. And the interesting thing about the post-secondary institutions, and I'm sure many of you who have attended and are working in co-ops actively or seeking them, or new grads who are looking for work, I don't have to tell you this, you're living it. We, in Canada, our post-secondary institutions are second to none in the world in teaching the theory of science. Indeed, we prepare our students in an excellent way on scientific knowledge. However, they sometimes miss the mark on teaching them the business of science. And that's a big issue, and that's a huge gulf between what the institutions are teaching and what the employers need. And we're going to be getting into that in the panel very actively in a very short period of time. And the reason why that happens is a lot of the times those academic programs are just not equipped to be able to meet the needs of the employers because they're so busy building on the theory of science. So that is why the federal government in the last 5 years created a program called the Student Work Placement Program. This program was to inspire through wage subsidized work integrated learning placements was to try to bridge that gap between what the schools were teaching and what the employers were saying they needed. 80% of the bioeconomy are small and medium-sized enterprises, many of whom comprise 10 or less employees. They don't have the time to inculcate some of those skills over the 6 to 9 months ramp up for the students who join their workplace. And more to the point, they often don't have the culture that can make work integrated learning a priority. So we incent them through wage subsidies. So let's talk about the Student Work Placement Program. The Student Work Placement Program provides employers with wage subsidies up to $7,500, and it's now 75%. In the wake of COVID, that went from 50% to 75%. So you will see many of the wage subsidy programs that we had were highly successful prior to the pandemic, but have been beefed up to make sure that they were more in tune with the economic recovery measures that the federal government has released, including CEWS and CERB and all of those different things. It connects employers, students, and post-secondary institutions. So the students, mainly through their post-secondary institutions, the cooperative and career education centers, link the students to the employers. And then BioTalent Canada comes in and is able to link the two and incent the employer to hire students with up to a $7,500 wage subsidy. It sustains and creates new work integrated learning opportunities, and it gives students job-ready experience that they often do not get within their post-secondary institution. Next slide. The employer eligibility is that they provide full-time employment up to a maximum of 16 weeks, though part-time employment is now eligible. Bioeconomy or healthcare employment and or job function. The balance of the wages cannot be funded by another federal government program. So in other words, because these are federal government wages, this is funded in part by the government of the Federal Department of Employment and Social Development Canada. The balance of the wages can't come from IRAP, they can't come from MyTax, they can't come from NSERC or any of the other federal governments. They can come from provincial sources or municipal sources and other sources beyond the company's own private funding, but just not federal sources. And the student must be an active employee, covered by the employer's payroll and insurance. So we have a link down there, biotalent.ca for co-op funds. We're going to be talking a little bit more about how the employee can be eligible. Next slide. The student eligibility is registered in a full or part-time post-secondary program. So part-time is brand new in the COVID time, which has expanded the scope for the program. The person must be a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or person with refugee protection under the law. Unfortunately, no foreign students are not currently eligible for this program. I get asked that every time I'm at one of these events, so I just thought I'd preempt it. It is something we're working on. Many post-secondary institutions are trying to get the federal government to loosen those criteria, but currently that's not the case. And of course, students have to be legally able to work in Canada according to the laws and regulations of whatever province or territory. Next slide, please. So right now, we will be placing more students in this program in 2020 and 2021 than we ever have in our history. It's largely because this program was limited to bioscience students only. We had this program for 3 years. This is the 3rd year of the program. And there were 1,400 placements for bioscience students. But then the federal government, through its own economic recovery measures, indicated that the healthcare institutions of Canada and the healthcare delivery systems of Canada needed beefing up. And certainly in the age of a pandemic, how can you refuse a government that requests that we add healthcare to our student work placement program? So certainly BioTalent Canada was pleased to take on this brand new challenge. And now everything from doctors' offices, hospitals, pharmacies, long-term care facilities, and home healthcare services. And again, we're proud of this because it's something that we can help beef up the Canadian healthcare system in the midst of a pandemic. Next slide, please. So during COVID-19, the federal government changed some of the criteria for this program. First of all, companies used to have were only eligible to add new co-op positions year after year after year. Their existing baseline number would change. That would be a net new. In other words, only the net new were eligible for funding. They've eliminated that criteria, which means every single co-op or work integrated learning position that any company in Canada is employing during this period is now eligible for this kind of funding. That is directly in response because so many, as we've seen, so many bioconnect companies have contracted their services and their recruitment in the wake of the pandemic. 75% subsidy, I've mentioned that after May 25th, 2020. And yes, we can backfill up to 20 for positions that have even already started at this point, up to $7,500. We can provide now pre-approval of employers and jobs to allow companies to plan for what they're going to be hiring down the road. And we can put up to 75% of advanced payment for small and medium-sized enterprises, less than 500 employees. Students can now work from home. That sounds like a redundant criteria since we're all doing that now. But at the same time, that wasn't the case before COVID. So they've changed that criteria. And now post-secondary institutions can hire their own students for their own labs. That was not allowed before that. So they've loosened those criteria as well. Next. Other wage subsidy programs, just so you all know, I'm not to go in these in depth. They're very much detailed on BioTalent Canada's website, is the Science and Technology Internship Program. That's the first one, but these are for youth, people who are not students, new grads, not students, and young people that are 31 years of age or younger. These three, Science and Technology Internship Programs, Science Horizons and Career Starter, are all wage subsidy programs that new grads or non-students can apply for, and companies can. We can supply up to $30,000 for, which represents 50% of a wage subsidy for up to 6 to 9 months in some of these programs. For more information, again, on our website, I'm not going to go into these in detail. Next. So, as I said, this is where all of the information is. I will stop and take a breath, and I will take a moment to introduce our distinguished panelists. We'll talk about the diversity and inclusion issue in a few moments, but I wanted to start in this, and we wanted to frame this just to say these are some of the new opportunities that the federal government has beefed up in terms of trying to not only embolden the biotech, the bioeconomy, to help companies pivot in the wake of COVID research, but also in line with their economic recovery platforms. So, with further ado, you've heard enough from me. Let's talk to some of our panelists here. I'd like to introduce a few of them to you. I'll introduce you first with hopefully your correct name and title, and I haven't screwed that up at all yet. And then we'll go through a little and ask you to talk, say a few words about this particular topic, which is how have you seen student opportunities? Have they increased? Have they decreased? Where you work and where you find yourself? How has that affected the company, and how do you see the environment around you shifting in the wake of some of the changes that you've seen? So, with me, I'd like to introduce first Shiva Darvishi, who's Chief Operating Officer of Micellae Delivery Systems Incorporated. Welcome, Shiva. Michael Duong, who's the Head of Personalized Healthcare for Hoffmann-La Roche Limited. Sonia Igboanugo, and I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly, who is our student experience here, who's completed her MBDC at McMaster University. Welcome, Sonia. Ann Mullin, who's the principal at Shift Health. Welcome, Ann. And Vijay Shahani, who's the Director of Applied Science at Cyclica. So, with all of you, and feel free to please elaborate on some of the background. I only said name and title here on what you do on a day-to-day basis where you are and your experience. Maybe we could start off with Ann from Shift Health. And tell us what you've been experiencing over at Shift Health in terms of your recruitment, your retention, your whole outlook with regards to hiring, and in particularly hiring young people.
Sure, thanks, Rob. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Mullin, and I'm a principal at Shift Health. Briefly, Shift Health is a strategy consulting firm that serves clients in the health research and innovation ecosystem. And I think over the past 6 months, we've been delighted to see that our business has remained fairly stable and is showing great signs of activity, particularly in the recent months. But when I think about recruiting, it really is a new world because we're recruiting from behind a screen, which is a new experience for us at Shift Health. Nevertheless, I think the opportunities continue to be there. Late breaking news, we're expecting to be recruiting an analyst, which is an entry-level position for recent life sciences graduates with an MSc or PhD, and that'll be going live in the coming weeks. And we're also expecting to be working with BioTalent and some of our colleagues at some of the programs within academic institutions to create some internship positions in the very early new year. So we have a lot of exciting talent to bring on board, and we're thinking a lot about how to do that in this setting. We do have experience already with onboarding a new team member during a lockdown, and we've been able to do that successfully, having moved fairly smoothly into the Zoom world. But we still contemplate how we can really foster some of the key elements of our culture in this setting. How do you create a sense of collaboration and teamwork when you're at a distance and working remotely? And I'm sure many of my colleagues on the panel today are contemplating and working through some of those very same challenges. And as we look at bringing on some new junior team members, we think about what skills will help somebody thrive and succeed in this sort of setting. And I think more so than in the past, we're interested in finding talent that is technically capable and impressive, but more importantly, I think in this world, we're looking for people who are self-starters, who are very independent, who are able to take a lot of initiative, and as a result build trust with their teams, because you immediately have confidence that they can work independently and that they will ask for help in a carefully considered way. So I think that's sort of something that's new that we're placing emphasis on. And I think, if anything, what we're challenged to do in this new work setting is look for people who are flexible, able to adapt to working from home, to building collaborative teams outside of the office setting, and still maintain a high level of creativity and productivity. So maybe I'll stop there, but I'm happy to chat more as the panel continues.
That's great, and you brought up some excellent topics that I think we'll hopefully scratch a little bit more on, particularly company culture and some of those new skills. And I think a lot of our audience will probably be wanting to delve a little deeper on that. Shiva Darvishi over at Micellae, can you tell us a little bit about what you're experiencing over there and how you guys have tried to adapt to the worstly used cliche of all time, the new normal?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. So hello, everyone. My name is Shiva. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Micellae, as Rob mentioned. We are a U of T-based startup company, and our work is on innovative drug delivery systems. We are currently at a pre-launch stage, which means that we are pre-revenue. We're highly dependent on U of T for access to labs and other resources. That also means that our commercial launch depends on how well and how quickly we're going to finalize our research and experiments. When this pandemic started, we had to pause, evaluate, and find alternative solutions, or as you mentioned, pivot in a sense. How we dealt with the situation was that we had to put the hiring of technical staff on hold. We had to put our experiments on hold for a few months until we were able to secure alternative lab solutions, which obviously came with additional cost. It came with delays, and only in July we were able to resume R&D activities. It is only recently or now that we're ready to hire again, and that is only possible because of the programs that have been made available to us. For some of them, we didn't qualify before the pandemic and we qualify now, or programs such as the student work placement program that Rob mentioned. We are able to get some individuals that are qualified to do scientific and also business, who also have business skills. We're also able to use the Career Started program to hire additional staff. This is all coming. We haven't used them yet. As I mentioned, we just got to the stage that we feel confident enough to restart hiring. MyTax is another resource that we are using, and that's confirmed, and we're going to start that in September, that is going to be a huge support for us, and a huge part of our R&D is going to get done through the MyTax program. There will be more that I'd like to share, and I'm sure that there will be questions, but I just want to briefly mention, with this change, with this whole global change, I think there are a lot of opportunities that's going to show up, whether it's for the employer or for the students, or for people who are new to the workforce. And again, that's through these programs, but also the accessibility. If one thing that we learned through this pandemic is that a lot of things can be done remotely. If you think hard enough, you'll find a way, even for technical lab level experiments. There are always ways, and we were able to find solutions. So if you have a technical job, if you have to be in a lab, don't worry about it. There are always solutions. There are always alternatives, and it will always work out. I'll be happy to talk more about it as we go through the questions.
Great. Thanks, Shiva. I appreciate that.
Okay.
So let's turn now to give Vijay Shahani, the Director of Applied Science at Cyclica Incorporated, the podium. Maybe you could tell us a little bit of what's going on and what you've experienced at Cyclica.
Sure, thanks Rob. And so good evening everyone. My name is Vijay Shahani. I'm the Director of Applied Science at Cyclica. We are I guess I still consider it a startup, but we've been operational since I think 2014. We're using and applying artificial intelligence as a way of enabling more efficiencies within the drug discovery world. We are kind of very privileged at this point in time to be actively hiring. I know unfortunately, a lot of other companies aren't in that same position right now. And as Shiva just mentioned, having to put things on delays, and very thankful and happy to hear that you're now being able to hire again. So that's, congratulations on that. I think it's one of the things where we've had the chance to onboard several folks actually, which is an interesting experience in the environment that we're in. Typically, when you bring people into the office, there's organic conversation, you get to meet the team, and it's just a much more natural experience. So how do you replicate that kind of, like, infuse that culture in this digital room, or in this digital world where people are sitting in their bedrooms or what have you, and making sure that they feel like they're engaging with your future colleagues and their current colleagues. And so, using maybe being a bit over communicative is kind of one of the words that, or one of the tools that we use. Lots of check-ins. We've come up with ways of having buddy systems so that everybody who gets onboarded is onboarded with a buddy who is someone that they check in with every morning, just talk about challenges that they face in the day-to-day, just someone to even bounce any ideas around, just so you have that camaraderie that you sometimes form when you first join companies. I've also found it useful to construct guides. I mean, typically it's not something that we used in the company, but having an SOP guide, which, as boring as they are, but it can get somebody caught up to speed fairly quickly, especially if you make it engaging and make sure that you're always there to answer questions within the operating procedure, because you just don't have those organic conversations that pop up when you're sitting next to someone or in the same room as someone, right? So you have to facilitate this in some way. I think hiring was also an interesting challenge. We've had typically we would, pre-COVID, you would call the interviewees and then have them come into the office, meet the key stakeholders. How do you still get those very meaningful conversations going between the candidate and key stakeholders, but not make it too onerous? And I think that's a challenge. And we've tried different levels of engagement, having kind of group calls or multiple single calls. And for candidates, I think it's a challenging environment to be in. And so it's something we're still figuring out. It's a challenge. We've experimented with other things. I think we've arrived at a something that feels comfortable, but it's something that we're continuously kind of trying to improve and think about. So like everyone here, I don't want to monopolize the time. I'm sure there's a lot of other insights that people could share. And so I will stop here, but happy to answer any other questions about how we're tackling hiring and onboarding folks and the new normal, right? As you said, Rob.
Excellent, thanks, Vijay. You hit a bunch of points, but I'll tell you, certainly the companies that we're dealing with, we're suffering from this too. We just onboarded 15 people virtually in the last 3 weeks. So it's certainly, the challenges are there for the managers and particularly companies that don't have potentially well-developed HR platforms and HR cultures. So you've hit on a multitude of really good points. So let's go over to Michael Duong, who's the head of personalized healthcare at Hoffmann-La. Roche. Michael, thanks for joining us. Mike, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So as you mentioned, I head up personalized healthcare for Roche, and some of you may or may not know, Roche is one of the world's largest biopharmaceutical companies. I think at last count, we're somewhere like #2 or something like that. But we're a pharmaceutical company in the middle of an identity crisis, is what I like to say, because we are in tradition a biotechnology and pharmaceutical company, but we're very quickly, by design, becoming a integrated health solutions company. So we see, our role is delivering value to patients across the entire patient journey, and not just, when they're ill and when they need a treatment, which is typically our focus, what traditionally has been our focus. And when as coming up with drugs, treating diseases, what we want to do is become a company that treats people. And this may mean, giving them an option before they even get sick in the prevention space. It means, delivering any solution that people need, let alone patients. And so that is sort of the focus of what I head up at Roche, is this transition to becoming a personalized healthcare company. So personalized healthcare is a new business model for us. It is about integrated solutions, but it is about delivering it at an individual level. So not a population. When you treat diseases, it's easy to lump people in to categories of disease. When you treat people, you really need to look at the individual, and you really need to look at what they need, truly understand, from a sample of one, and be able to deliver exactly what it is that they need. And that's not an easy task, but that's something that we've set as our ambition, set as our goal, and that's sort of the future that we've painted for ourselves. So exciting times at Roche. What does that mean for us? It means there's a significant shift in terms of the talent capabilities that we're bringing into the company. As you can imagine, how do you understand what individuals need from billions of people across the world? And, one of the strategies for us is really diving into data, diving into big data sets, whether, starting at health, but going way beyond health, and partnering with Amazon and Google and Microsoft, and really looking at social data sets, the data sets that they have, combining that with the data sets that we have, and ultimately analyzing all of these massive amounts of data in order to better understand people so that we can give them what they need. So that means bringing in capabilities that we'd never had as a traditional pharma company: data scientists, artificial intelligence scientists, bringing in sort of the people who have the education from the programs that never existed when I went to school, right? And so young talent, yes, definitely, because these are the people that are trained in the new technologies that we need, and the people that we had in traditional pharma never had that background. So there's been just massive influx of data science across our organization, massive amounts of partnering with startup companies, bringing them into the Roche group of companies, or Roche families, we like to call it, and really partnering at a much more holistic level. We've also recently gone through a significant transformation. So Roche, as a global company, has gone agile. You know, as much as we work with a lot of startup companies, we really like the way that they work. So we decided, hey, why not? Let's become, you know, the world's largest agile company. And so in doing so, you can imagine all of you folks that work in agile, co-location is extremely important in agile, right? Like small teams working together, swarming together, sprinting together. Physical whiteboards, physical post-it notes, and we converted our entire office into sort of nirvana of agile. You know, post-it notes all over the place, whiteboards all over the place, you know, little lounges all over the place, and it was really meant to spur on co-located brainstorming, co-located working together, and all of a sudden the pandemic hits and we're all sort of dispersed into our own homes. And we're still working in agile, but how do you do that without a physical co-location? So these are some of the struggles that we're going through right now. We, of course, have the benefit of having a massive IT team, infrastructure team, a massive human resources organization that has, you know, for the better part of the last 6 months, put together amazing solutions, amazing tools and technologies that are enabling us to continue on this journey. It really is a masterclass in sort of rapid response and leveraging technology to enable a way of working that we truly have gone all in on. And we've made those investments to make this very productive, you know, and we've had a work from home policy ever since, you know, I joined the organization 8-9 years ago. But now it's just become a new normal, work from home and using all of these technologies to do it. But I'll share with my colleagues all of the issues around recruitment, onboarding, all of that kind of stuff. We onboard a lot outside of the Canadian geography. We bring in a lot of people. We actually work with a lot of people who don't live in Canada. And so we've done a lot of like online virtual recruiting, online onboarding, but not to this extent. So this is crazy but cool at the same time. And addressing these challenges are also crazy but cool. So it is the new normal. So we're getting used to it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I know one of the best quotes I ever heard was that renowned philosopher Mike Tyson, who said, you know, plans are what people make until I come and punch them in the face. And I think that's how everybody feels about COVID, is that these were all these wonderful plans until this lovely little virus came and punched us all right in the face. So what are you going to do? But I'll tell you. So just to shift gears a little bit, let's talk to Sonia. Sonia, your experience, you're coming from somebody who's experienced the student life and experienced job seeking relatively recently. So you finished off, you've completed your program at McMaster, I understand. So tell us a little bit of what you've experienced during this period, maybe just prior, and what you've learned.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rob, and good evening to everyone. So yeah, I completed my master's in biomedical discovery and commercialization at McMaster, and you know, in that period, I also had the opportunity to intern at Shift Health during the switch between you know, COVID and quarantining, and I think that adapting towards the working from home was definitely something that taught me a lot about the importance of just like both the companies that we're working in and their flexibility, and how much that translates into me as a student, just the environment where I can work and learn from. And I think that especially with COVID changing, there was a lot of flexibility and adapting that I had to do. And I think what Anne mentioned definitely resonated with me in terms of just being able to seek out that company culture and being able to seek out the environments and the sort of work culture that is best for me, especially given that you aren't necessarily working with people in person, but definitely, I think learning to quickly identify how best I could be very proactive in the work environments, and if it's communicating, making sure that I'm communicating well and communicating on time, because of the fact that you know, everyone is adapting both the employees and the firm itself. And so I think overall, I was definitely very privileged to be at a firm that was very, that had measures in place for working from home, which definitely took a lot of the pressure off of some of the challenges of transitioning to working from home. Sure.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Sonia. I appreciate that. And I think the next, we're going to go into questions from the audience and that are submitted online very soon. But I wanted to touch on the second part of this panel, and that is the topic of inclusion and diversity and social unrest that we've witnessed over the summer. I'm going to just frame it a little bit from BioTalent Canada's perspective. BioTalent Canada is a small organization itself. We've recently grown to about 40 employees. We feel very strongly that we can't really talk about HR best practices unless we try to employ them. Through our research, we have seen those organizations, those companies like BioConnect that have embraced inclusion and diversity. Time and time again, we've taken a look at this, not from a perspective of, gee, it's a nice thing for a company to do. Gee, you should do that, it's your Canadian obligation, being this multicultural land of newcomers. More than that, we wanted to find out how it affected their business practices. And time and time and time again, those companies who embraced inclusion and diversity have found enhanced innovation, enhanced problem solving from that cultural diversification, from the way that different cultures approach different problems, including scientific ones. And third, enhanced access to foreign markets, because they're able to get a perception from the customer base, the client base, the marketing base. So it's not only the idea of inclusion and diversity that it supports the Canadian social fabric, which it absolutely does, but it's simply a competitive business advantage. And it's been shown to be that time and time again. We released a statement to that effect talking about it. But it was very difficult because, you know, perception is reality. And even where BioTalent Canada is concerned, I had three of my colleagues, three Black colleagues who came up to me and said, we wanted a podium during this, and it was all during this pandemic, of course, saying we want to talk about this, about our experience, not only here in the bioeconomy and what we do, but also we're located in Ottawa, the nation's capital, and and they were from very diverse backgrounds, very diverse religious. One was a newcomer, two were not, etc. Backgrounds, and that podium was very powerful. It was one of the things that we do as a company. So I wanted to know how this whole atmosphere has affected, or how you've responded, or your company has responded to it. So I'll let people volunteer for this one, because I'm not sure everybody wants to speak on this. It would be lovely if everybody does, but I'll start. Maybe if somebody would like to volunteer to talk about it. Shiva, tell us a little bit of what you guys have experienced.
Thanks, Rob. So as I mentioned, we are a small startup company, and one might think that it's not an issue for us or something that we don't need to think about right now. However, we are building a company that is hopefully going to continue to thrive and expand and stay there and be there for a long time, hopefully. And it is important that we pay attention to the inclusion and diversity issues, because today we're setting the tone for the company's culture for today and for the future. So things that are very dear to my heart are obviously women in leadership positions, women in organizations like that, women in startups, and the matter of race, the matter of immigration, both the founder of my company, Dr. Mehdi Nooroi, and myself, we are immigrants to Canada. So we're very sensitive to that. We want to give opportunity to all nationalities, to the newcomers, or to everyone, basically. we want to be sensitive to age. We want to be sensitive to the possibilities for creating possibilities for students. So basically, what matters is the individual, what they bring on the table, and we're not going to make the decision based on what they look like or their age or their ethnicity or whatever. So it is something that is very important and dear to our hearts. And what I was going to mention that you didn't talk a lot about the Career Starter program, but that is a program that that is available through BioTalent that encourages the hiring of minorities, of newcomers, of students who haven't been able to find a job, or all those people who have been out of job for a while. And I'm understanding that that program has been loosened a little bit as well. We weren't able to, that's one of the programs that wasn't available to us before, and it is now on some levels. So it is the environment that encourages that, but the companies, even startups, it is important to think about it from right away, basically.
Right. No, you're right. And some of the programs that we have, including actually the student work placement program, increases the level of wage subsidy if you hire someone from a special underrepresented group, including women, including newcomers, including Indigenous Canadians, and including Canadians with disabilities. So thank you for mentioning that, Shiva, because I didn't touch upon that in the presentation, so I do appreciate that.
Of course.
Anybody else who would like to? Vijay.
If I may, I was just going to touch on what Shiva said. So it's actually funny, and I'm very glad you're thinking about diversity right from the get-go, because I joined Cyclica when it was a smaller company. We're around 40, 45 people strong now, but I joined when we were around 7 folks. And for the first little while, we look around the boardroom and there's just a bunch of dudes, dudes with computers and ideas. And it was great. I mean, we worked very well together, but we realized that we needed to get different perspectives into that boardroom. And gender diversity and ethnic diversity was something that I think we lacked. So we definitely emphasized that moving forward. And yes, it might, you might have a slew of candidates, all very strong, but you sometimes have to go a little bit further and search a little bit further, and don't be afraid to just keep searching, because you need to have that perspective. You need that well-rounded kind of group to really make strides and be creative. And I think also, touching on the notion of ethnic diversity, there is a disparity in terms of the amount of talent that's coming into STEM, and that's something that we need to start earlier, kind of encouraging more inclusive individual, and be more inclusive in who gets into STEM in the get-go. And organizations like Visions of Science, who's led by a good friend of mine, Dr. Eugenia Dudu, who has done a tremendous job at encouraging diversity and encouraging and building programs so that under access communities access to STEM and getting young folks motivated about science from all genders and all ethnicities. And I just wanted to make sure I brought that up, because I think if you haven't heard of Visions of Science, I think it's something that you definitely want to look into. And for all the youth out there who are scientists themselves, it's a great opportunity for you to volunteer and maybe teach the next generation of scientists and encourage them to get into the field that you love. So I just wanted to make sure I threw that out there. And a small little thing that Cyclica is doing is our own little education initiative called AI Eat My Homework, which is something that we're just giving some small topics about how artificial intelligence can be applied to drug discovery, and kind of doing some fundamentals of biology and the cross between machine learning and how that might work together to enhance the drug discovery world. So I think that's really important. Obviously, emphasizing, just to recap, emphasizing the need and prioritizing it. It has to be prioritized. It can't be just something that will happen organically. Unfortunately, I think you need to put that effort in. And yeah, supporting programs that bring more diversity earlier on is something that I think is very important for success and for helping tackle this problem head on.
That's great. Thanks, Vijay. I can't tell you how many times, yeah, and I can't tell you how many times that I've been at biotechnology trade conferences, and there's way too many people who look like me, middle-aged white guys, and I'm just sort of sitting there going, my goodness, and I think you mentioned that, Shiva. I mean, there's one thing to have a diverse workforce, but we've got to really work on diversifying our leadership. We need lots more people of color and lots more women. No question. Anne, you had your hand up, please.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on this topic. It's one that I think has hit the team members at Shift Health very hard this year, but we've really channeled, I think, our emotions and our responses into action and into actions that'll be playing out over the coming few months. But I wanted to speak a little bit to a few things that we do in terms of recruiting that I believe are helping us make better decisions and maximize the diversity of our team. And a few of these things have been in place for a while, so I'm proud that they are there, but I'm also humble in recognizing that there's so much more to do, and we're continuing to learn and integrate new approaches. But what we do right now is we fully redact every resume that our team reviews. So that's removing any information that might reveal anything about an individual's gender, race, sexuality, disabilities, and so on. So that we are really quite blind when we're looking at somebody's resume, and I think that leads to a more objective assessment of our candidates. When it comes to meeting individuals and reviewing their performance during the interview, we do have some technical assignments, and we review those blinded as well. So even though we've met these individuals through a behavioral interview, when we look at their assignments, we're assessing them without knowledge of who may have done the work. And the other fairly significant change that we've made is to our interviewing team. Many of the senior members of our team at Shift Health are white males, but we've taken steps to ensure that our interviewers, are more diverse in nature. And I think those are things that, as an applicant, that you can look for. That will either demonstrate the composition of a company that you may be interested in, or perhaps their prioritization of diversity in decision-making processes. But I think as we look ahead, there are a couple of emerging opportunities, and I'm completely aligned with Vijay's comment on the importance of being a role model and a champion for science and STEM among young members of equity-seeking groups. I think there's lots of very meaningful work to do there, and it's something that Shift Health is taking a look at for the near future. And we're also going through a process of reviewing how we actually do strategy consulting. And are there ways that we can be asking questions, conducting research, engaging with our clients that put these issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion at the forefront of the work that we do.
That's great, you know, and certainly something that I'm hoping organizations like Shift can do more of is, maybe it's through us or through Life Sciences Ontario, is to bring those out in stories of how you just eloquently said that, or in practical things, fully redacted CVs and resumes, for example. Great opportunities and great examples to give for smaller companies that may not have access or not as well developed an HR culture as some of the larger companies. Mike, do you have anything to add from Roche?
Yeah, but the first thing I wanted to add was just to comment on Anne and Shift's sort of strategies or tools, whatever you want to call it, but they're really cool. Like, so we don't do that, but I'm definitely going to bring that back to our HR team to see if there's an opportunity to pilot some of these different initiatives in our D&I committee. The first thing I wanted to say is so it's sort of in our DNA, like especially in our new DNA. So diversity, we feel have always felt that it powers our innovation, and it starts with so there's this thing at Roche where it's not just about what you do, right? So like what you do is not your job, but it's who you are as well. Like what you bring about who you are to the job allows you to do things differently, more effectively. And so from our perspective, it's always been about the person. And as much as we are applying personalization to what we do, personalization is also about who we are. So, you know, we want to treat, we want our healthcare solutions to treat people as individuals, but we also treat our own employees as individuals. So we've taken diversity to the extent that it's the visible characteristics, but it's also the invisible characteristics. And it's also, you know, there's diversity amongst middle-aged white males. And we want to call out that diversity as well. And we want to leverage that diversity. We want to leverage ethnic diversity. We want to leverage genetic, you know, all sorts of diversity, both physical and invisible. And so how do you do that? And it's quite tough, but bringing in some of the different things. We have a massive speak up culture at Roche. A lot of that is required for you to be able to understand, you know, what's different at truly a personal level. We work very hard to ensure, you know, there is psychological safety for a speak up culture. You can't just say you have a speak up culture. You have to physically create that environment where people feel safe to speak up. And, you know, I'm not at liberty to post it, but it would be amazing. You guys would be incredibly surprised to see, you know, sort of the comment section in the middle of a massive webinar given by our global CEO, and the level of speak up that is actually exhibited by sort of our employees, and the ability for them to feel safe to do so. And I think that type of culture really allows us to be aware of diversity that we just can't see, let alone the diversity that we can see. But, you know, aside from that point, fully agree with what my colleagues on this panel have already talked about. And, you know, it's one of the top, if not the top priorities that we put into practice because of how important it is to sort of our innovation engine and our ability to be effective in this industry.
Thanks, Mike. Sonia, were you onboarded during the pandemic? Or was you before?
No, I had started right before.
Okay, so tell me how you experienced with everything else and as a new employee, especially with your colleagues and what you saw going around you. How did you feel about the industry that you chose to be a part of, and your journey in trying to establish your career in Ontario's bioeconomy?
Yeah, so I definitely think that, you know, a lot of my experiences relate a little bit to what Vijay mentioned in terms of being oftentimes like in the spaces of whether it's science or some of the things I'm passionate about in STEM, often being the only Black person in those rooms. And so I think that one thing that I've learned and I appreciated, especially starting at a firm during the awakening of the world with some of the injustices people were facing, was being in a space where conversations like these were intentional and were being had in a way where there were actionable items to rectify some of the injustices or discrimination and things like that. And so I think that in terms of in my journey in this career in this space, that has been something that has always been a passion of mine in terms of getting into science, and the excitement that I have about STEM fields is always making sure that you know, there's mentorship and that there's a younger generation that I'm mentoring to be able to be pull up as well into sort of this space in these conversations when we're having conversations about innovation and, you know, new advances in whether it's healthcare and all of that. I think that that's something that I learned was important to me in where I was working, and especially during my internship at Shift Health. That was something that were conversations that were had and that I felt were intentional, and I think really affirmed my interest in being in these environments and continuing to have conversations like that.
You make a really interesting point, and I think Mike touched upon it too, in terms of when all of this was coming out. I think a lot of the other HR directors, et cetera, in the bioeconomy that I talked to, they were pleased, not shocked, but a little surprised at how many people wanted to speak out on this issue and lead, that there were these leadership opportunities, that this whole thing provided these leadership and speaking opportunities from within their ranks, of people who felt very, very, very close to this, and wanted to speak out with their colleagues, and in, as Mike mentioned, a safe environment where they felt that they could. So I thought it was interesting that this whole topic, this whole atmosphere, also provided companies an unprecedented ability to look inward for leaders, which I thought was really quite interesting, and I'm sure you've all felt that. But I think it was really good, and hopefully the companies responded, because then obviously the idea of transparency and the idea of openness is felt throughout. So thank you for your thoughts on that, all of you, and I'm sure we'll have some questions on it. So let's get to the questions at this point, if you'll permit me. We have the question open to answer, and as Brian said, if you vote for questions, you can bump them up to the top. I'll try to get to some of them. Because we have such a diverse audience and a diverse number, I'd like to keep the questions a little broad, not too specific in terms of only applying to one or two people. So let's start with the first one here. I've got a few here as well, but we'll start off with some of the audience's questions. So the first one is, what are some of the recruiting challenges with the current pandemic, and has your evaluation of potential candidates changed in any way? So I guess, and I think this is going to be very interesting in sort of contrasting how startups and small SMEs approach this, and how larger companies who have a much more established and developed HR processes and culture, how did they shift? Were they able to be nimble in terms of reacting to the environment around them? So let's start with Vijay, if you don't mind. Vijay, can I ask upon you? You touched upon it a little bit in the mid one. How did your recruitment strategies change in light of the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a great question, and for us, it was a matter of we've relied on getting out there at points to get people encouraged and to reach out and apply for these positions. So we've had to rely on warm networks to kind of seed interest in some of the positions. We've had to use Indeed to kind of get candidates in. But at that point, once we have the candidates in hand, it became a challenge of, well, how do we interview these folks, right? Once you triage down and you kind of get your top candidates, that's where the real kind of question came in forward, because the traditional way of having them come into the office, as I mentioned earlier, is just not going to work in the COVID environment. How do you showcase, as a small company, culture is very important to us, and convincing folks that we're going to stick around for a while is important to us. That we are, we come off as with a degree of professionalism that we think is important to, we're hiring very talented people, and sometimes they have lots of options. So we have to make sure that as much as we're interviewing them, they're interviewing us as well. And so how do you, come across as professional and as a competitive employer in some respect? And so making sure that we, had the right folks on conversations, scheduling meetings clearly, and having things organized was very important to us. I mentioned earlier, key stakeholders, having folks talk to individuals that you might not normally talk to in a traditional interview. You're talking to maybe the directors or higher level folks in different roles. So you get a bit more exposure to the company and to kind of convey that professionalism and the maturity. And so that was, I think, really important for us. And that kind of changed how we conducted these interviews. It might have led to, and I mentioned earlier, a little bit maybe more stress on the candidates, because they're having to talk to more people, they're having to have more conversations. But we thought it was important for them to have a good sense of who Cyclica was as a company. And so that was kind of one of the major takeaways, I would say. And it, on our end, we would then have to debrief and kind of collate kind of a broader range of perspectives. But I think that actually led to potentially maybe smarter hires, to be completely honest. People coming on board and feeling more confident in who we're bringing onto the team, and folks that were fitting of our culture and what we're trying to build. I think that became critically important in what we're looking for people we were hiring.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that. So maybe in contrast for that, Anne, can you comment on that, on an organization that has perhaps a little bit more established processes and methodologies?
Well, we are a small firm, so I don't want to give the illusion that we have the scale of you know, an internationally present consulting firm or pharmaceutical company. But we have been able to move our processes fairly smoothly into the remote environment. So a typical interview process would include some behavioral interviews with key leaders and members of our team. It would include a sort of skills-based assignment and test, and in some cases a more interactive experience that recreates or attempts to recreate the team environment. And we can do that fairly easily with the tools that we're using, for example, this evening. But what I think is a little bit more challenging for us is to identify some of these skills that we believe are important for people to thrive and succeed in this particular setting as we work from home. And I mentioned a few of those earlier in our conversation, but how can we review a resume to really discern whether an individual has a track record of being a self-starter and a leader and taking initiative? How can we evaluate someone's judgment and decision-making in terms of working independently and escalating key issues? So I think those are things that we're a little bit more attuned to, but using the mechanisms that we've always used.
Understood, understood. Any other comments, or can we move on to the next question? Go ahead. Okay, great. This is a good one, and maybe we can start with you, Shiva, and we'll go to Vijay after this. How do we know when it's a good idea to take a chance on applying for positions in a startup, especially in this economy? I think that's a pretty good question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a great question, and thank you for that question, because I've been thinking about that. When it is important to look at the startup, but also their network. Who are they connected to? What kind of support they have? And by that, I mean, for example, we're a startup. For the longest time, it was just two of us. And then gradually we grew. However, during the pandemic, it was very easy to panic and say, okay, let's just give up. It's never going to work. We're never going to succeed. And time-wise, it was not great for us, like many other businesses. However, because we are a startup, we are a UT-based startup, we have access to University of Toronto, UTest, Mars, TIAP, and we reached out to everyone. We reached out to all the groups and received a lot of support, not financially, but through their networks, advice. We got access to experts in this area, people who have been through similar, this is a very unique situation, but we have been through challenging times such as this. So they grounded us through their experience and gave us confidence that, no, this is possible. So you're going to be able to get through this by doing this, doing that. And that was extremely helpful. So I guess if you're applying or if you're looking at a startup, don't hesitate to investigate how they're set up, who is their network, and who they're connected to. The other important factor is obviously how much funds they have. We were actually able to finalize a round of investment during the pandemic, and that was great. So once you see that, you'll know that, okay, they're doing something right, that a lot happened that was delayed, renegotiations on a lot of issues. However, we were able to finalize that. So that's an example. These are the things that you can look for in a startup. How much funds they have. Don't hesitate to ask this question. You might, you don't ask this question from maybe bigger companies, but with a startup, don't hesitate. You can ask, who are you connected to? who supports you, how much money do you have, and investigate. And if I have candidates who ask me these questions, I'm like, yep, you're the right one for our startup.
Awesome. Vijay, do you have anything to add to that?
I think Shiva definitely nailed it. Don't be afraid to ask. I was on a call with someone who we eventually hired, and she asked, what's your business model? Like, who are you connected to? Who's your VCs? And she was applying for a scientist position. Like, she was coming on as an applied scientist. So, but she was asking the questions that, you know, not many going into the business or going into the science of, or business of science or that world. To be honest, I was naive to it. When I joined Cyclica, I came straight out of my degree, and wow, what a big world was actually out there that I didn't even realize existed. And I think that's one of the things that you get when you join a startup, is this ability. It's you know, an adage that's used all the time. You wear many hats, but it's so true. You get exposure to so many different facets of working within science and the business of science. And I'm very thankful that I had an opportunity to learn that by working at a smaller company like Cyclica. And, you know, speaking to Anne's point, a lot of these students are super talented, they're super motivated, they're self-starters, they're entrepreneurial. If that is who you are as a person, think small maybe. And that sounds weird, but think about smaller groups where you could come in and you have an opportunity to help them grow. And then you grow with the company and pick up a lot of skills that you probably wouldn't have had if you were in a larger company. Not throwing any shade at Roche or anything like that. That's also a tremendous set of experience, but with a startup, you might get a little bit more exposure. And that's definitely helped me grow since joining Cyclica.
And I think that's part of fit, right? I mean, it is a question where if you got to get to know the kind of culture, the kind of lifestyle that employees are experiencing in these companies to see if it fits with yours, right? In terms of that. So I think, no, that's really good advice. I appreciate that. So here's an interesting question. Should an industry standard be instituted in where applicants are treated who take the time to apply only to be dismissed by an algorithm in minutes? Biases are clearly used to remove certain candidates. So that's very interesting. Jason, I have a note here that Jason, you would like to answer this question? Did you want to get involved in that? I had a...
Sorry, what note was that, Rob?
I had a note that Jason wants this question answered live. I didn't know if that you, Jason, or somebody else. So I was wondering, sorry, Jason, I didn't know if Brian had set that note or not. So, and it's disappeared now, so there we go. So this is an interesting thing. There is no industry standard for hiring, right? There's legals, but there is no industry standard. There's certain best practices. Does anybody want to weigh in on this? I mean, this is a bit of unconscious bias, right? We're talking about, are there, and I mean, Anne, you spoke about ways to remove that, so that even if it's present, you can't do it because you don't see the names or the countries or the genders, et cetera, on a resume or on a CV. Is this something that an industry standard should be instituted? Thoughts?
I can try to respond quickly. It looks like Mike has something to add as well. You know, I think if you are applying thoughtfully to any position, you have put a lot of work into your resume, your cover letter. You've likely customized it. You've aligned it well with what the company's interests and the job position is seeking. And it is indeed a lot of work when you do it well. I think reviewing resumes is also a matter of volume. At Shift Health, in any given call, we are able to review every resume with at least one or more pair of human eyeballs. And with the redacting methodology that we use, we're able to zero in on very quickly some very clear, measurable features of a resume that's likely to succeed or which could be eliminated. So we're able to apply that in our setting, I think in a fairly objective and fair way. But when you're talking about larger volumes, I can imagine that an automation is much more attractive, and that may be where Mike has some perspective on how to do that in the most fair way possible.
No, I don't. No.
I love the honesty. Excellent.
I did want to say, a few years ago when I was in the position to start hiring sort of for the first time, actually probably more than a few years ago. It feels like it was a few years ago, but it was many, many years ago. I shared the same frustration, in terms of like when I first got out of school and even a couple years in after my first job, applying to a lot of different roles, and like I'm just getting triaged out by whatever, if it's an automated algorithm or if it's just a cursory glance at my CV, I'm getting triaged out, and I don't have the opportunity to sort of, based on my CV, get in there and have a discussion with the hiring manager and really have that conversation. So when I had this opportunity to essentially hire my first team, I told the HR manager or the talent recruiter to give me every resume. Don't do any triage, and give me every single resume that comes through that's applying for these roles. I want to see them all. Oh, that was a mistake, because I got 2,500 plus resumes. And really, I mean, so just to Anne's point, the volume just makes it impossible to go through resumes without some level of, even if it's automated or if it's just a cursory, a brief look, just to make some initial filters. That almost is, unless somebody has a solution for that I couldn't honestly go through the 2,500 resumes with a fine-tooth comb to find that short list of 10 or 12 that I would have the conversation with. So it's a difficult task. It's a difficult challenge. One of the things that we're playing around with, we haven't done this yet at Roche Canada. We've done it at other Roche affiliates across the world, is case-based recruitment. So before even looking at the resume and even looking at the quote-unquote application, our first initial step of recruitment is just to pose a problem out to social media and say, a problem could be as simple as, we want to cure cancer. We don't know how to do it, but if you have a really good idea, connect with us and have that conversation. And then we'll connect with a bunch of people, and then, we'll have the conversations to start. And then those interesting conversations will lead to, well, why don't you send us your CV, resume, and we'll take it from there to see if you want to join the team or not. So we're playing around with that idea, just different ways of recruiting that don't rely on that CV or that application being the first thing we see from people, but giving more of an opportunity to explain, maybe demonstrate some potential that they didn't have an opportunity to demonstrate through their various different work experiences.
No, that's good thoughts, Mike. Thanks I appreciate that. That's good. So here's one that sort of really fits into some of the work integrated learning opportunities we were talking about earlier, and that many of you have availed yourselves and your companies of. How important is it to have experience when entering the biotech industry? As academics and students, we don't usually have any practical experience outside academia. So many of you have been using the student work placement program to get those students that kind of experience. Sonia, how did you find this as a job applicant? How did you find your experience or your lack of? How did you find it affected your job search?
So I definitely think that going into like the job search, I think that I found that I did have some experiences that weren't so focused on academia because, I was always intentional in doing so. And I think that with that question, it's beneficial because of the point Anne made about being, especially finding work in this time, being leaders and being very proactive. And I found a lot of those experiences I personally got from things that I was doing both outside of school and sort of non-academic experiences. But I also think that in that same line of thinking, having, whether that's in academia, whether it's leading research projects or, having experiences where you can sort of get the skills that I guess you would be missing if you weren't doing non-academic experiences, if that can come in the form of academic experiences or something that relates to the work you're doing in academia, then I think that, you know, it's a matter of how you highlight it on a resume or highlight it with the experiences that you do have. So for me, I was able to have those experiences, and I know that that helped me in terms of job hunting and even speaking at interviews. So I think it really is almost both in a sense where you are able to get the skills that are needed for the job you're applying for, or you know, the position you're looking for, if it does happen to be in relation to all of your academia related experiences or not.
That's a really good point. You know, people forget that in the bioeconomy, these are businesses. They have sales, they have marketing, they have client service. Those positions, even if they're not in biotechnology, Vijay, you were talking about earlier about some of the business skills that some of these people, some of the candidates that are required. I think a lot of candidates, certainly the ones that I talk to, forget that just because it's not in the bioeconomy, if you have 2 or 3 years of client services in retail or in B2B or something like that, that could be incredibly relevant, especially to a startup, where probably if it's like most small companies, the last thing that describes what you do is your job title. You know, it's sort of chief cook and bottle washer, right? If you're good at something, they'll shift you around and let you learn. So any other comments on that one in terms of work experience? You guys have lived it. You guys have seen in terms of onboarding people and using the work integrated learning platforms. Any other comments from the employers? Shiva.
Yes, I can talk about this from my experience in the startup, but also my previous experience in the pharmaceutical industry. Because there's always this need for scientific people, you always want someone who has great scientific background. What is important is that transition that happens from academia to the business world, I'm going to call it, or the corporate or the startup. That transition is critical. So in addition to the scientific capacities and skills, I want to see that an individual is ready for that transition, will understand that now there has been a transition into a business. And so basically I need some proof in terms of the character or experience, as Sonia said, some kind of experience that helps me understand that that individual is willing to transition. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that personality is hugely important. And whether or not that individual has had experience in outside of academia is not the most important thing. However, I'm going to say, if you can do something, speak to your personal skills and capacities and say that I am able to do so-and-so because of so-and-so, that will help us, the employers, to make the decision of make the balance between your lack of experience and outside of the academia and what your future in this new world would look like.
Okay, excellent. I'm conscious of time, so we're going to take one more quick question.
Rob, can I just very quickly, just on that previous question, I
Sure,
know
Vijay.
it's just something that's near and dear to my heart. So
Sure.
I was told after I was hired at Cyclica a few years later, not a few months later, but the person who hired me said that there was a pile of CVs of extremely strong scientists that they were considering for the role. And there was another smaller pile of one, which was me, which was really thrilling to hear. I wasn't in the really strong scientist panel, just so you know, I wasn't in that pile. But what happened was I had done, after my PhD, an accessory degree in biomedical communications. And that gave me a different skill set to complement my science. In this case, it was a communication of a visualization of science and communication of science. And I would say that, you know, maybe that's something to consider. And it's something that definitely helped me. I don't know if it's always going to be helpful, but having something accessory, maybe not in the business world, but accessory that you could speak to, as Shiva mentioned, can be very helpful. So I just want to throw that in there because it's been my personal experience and it's helped me greatly. So.
No, that's great. Excellent. Thanks, Vijay. I appreciate that. So we'll try to do one more question very quickly if we can. Or Jason, did you want to wrap up, or we have time for one more?
We have time for one more, Rob. Go
One
ahead.
more. So this question is, I've been approached by talent agencies to be represented for certain roles. Is this something you're seeing more of in the life sciences industry and in the current pandemic? And does your organization work with these types of organizations? And why don't you take this one for a shift?
Sure. I have not seen an increase in that personally, either in terms of people working with us looking to fill roles, or working with my colleagues more broadly in this sector. So, you know, that's sort of my informal, non-scientific assessment. We have worked with recruiting firms in the past, but usually for more of our operational and more administrative roles. And then I guess in my personal experience, what I've seen is talent agencies engaging for more senior level roles rather than entry level roles. But again, just sort of an informal pulse check on what I've seen in the past 6 months and in the past, say, 5 years.
And in the startup world, Shiva, is this something that you guys avail yourself up? I mean, there's obviously additional costs involved in dealing with these.
We tried to, but we couldn't afford it. So we didn't use that at the end of the day. However, I'm going to say that, again, not just for the startup world, but my past experience, I would recommend everyone to approach recruiters. If you're seeking a position, connect with these recruiting firms. Every single job that I have found was either through a recruiting firm or someone I knew who knew about some job. So do that favor to yourself and connect with a recruiting agency.
Right, and I couldn't agree more, because quite frankly, some of them can be quite brutal about your resume or about your approach and something, and it's really good free advice on how to conduct yourself, to redact your CV and get it more concise, especially if we found it very, very useful for newcomers who are sometimes there are cultural barriers in terms of the way we'd apply for jobs from where they come from and the way that we do it here. I'm going to close that off with that question, if that's okay with everyone. This is great, lively panel. Everybody brought such a great diverse set of opinions and approaches to things. Great questions. I'd like to ask Brian and Life Sciences Ontario, there's a bunch of questions here that had to do with my presentation and the BioTalent Canada I didn't want to get to that because they're so specific to the programs we offer. But if you could, it's not made by Anonymous, if you could wrap those up, we could either disseminate them, or we could, at least the BioTalent Canada questions, answer them offline and make them available to anybody who participated in the forum. With that, I'll see if that's possible. I want to thank Shiva, Vijay, Sonia, Mike, Anne. Thank you very much for being such an engaging panel and for being so open about your own experiences. And thanks to Life Sciences Ontario and Shift Health for inviting me here to participate in this great event. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Jason.
Oh, thanks, Rob, and thanks for presenting and moderating today's panel. You did a great job, and we really appreciate our partnership. And I think, you know, as we were developing this program with BioTalent and Shift Health, you know, we were asking ourselves, like, we thought that there was a need for this. We thought that there would be a lot of uptick, and we've seen that by the registration and the participation numbers. We've seen it through the number of questions, including the ones that we haven't been able to answer today, Rob. And so you're right. We've recorded the session. We'll take those back, and we'll try to get them out to the participants, get them answered. So if your question didn't get answered, we'll do our best to make sure it does with some follow-ups. So we'll have a few announcements just before we wrap up, but I do want to thank all of our panelists, Anne, Shiva, Mike, Sonia, and Vijay. Fantastic panel. Thanks so much for taking the time and sharing your insights with all of our participants here today. Brian, did you have some slides that you wanted to put up? There we go. One of the things that we didn't actually talk about today, and I was a little surprised, was virtual networking during these times. And that's something that I was very skeptical of when I first heard the whole concept of virtual networking. And Brian in our office, as he usually does, pulls rabbits out of hats and just finds the most interesting and unique platforms for doing things differently. And one of the platforms that we've been using for virtual networking opportunities is a platform called Remo. Every year we host a golf tournament, an in-person golf tournament. Rob usually shows up the day after the event, but you know, regardless of his inability to schedule the event, we decided this year it didn't make sense to host it in person, but we wanted to do something that was educational in nature, so it has nothing to do with golf, and then that way is actually more inclusive than our normal event, I believe, but also has some networking opportunities as well. So we've decided to run this event. It's a 2-day event. We're calling it our virtual ungolf tournament because it has nothing to do with golf. There's going to be some educational seminars. There's going to be some networking opportunities. It's really affordable. It's low cost to apply. And there's some great prizes. So there's going to be some fun giveaways as well. So if you haven't taken a look at that, I'd really encourage you to do so. And it's another opportunity for you to network with people from this community. Next slide, Brian. I finally want to just thank our corporate sponsors, of course, our platinum sponsors, Silicon Valley Bank, Innovative Medicines Canada, Merck, Shift Health, Sanofi, and Alexion. Our gold sponsors, Taiho, BioTalent Canada, Horizon, Admire, Antibody, and Stryker. And our silver sponsors, EY, Roche, BDO, University of Toronto, Scarborough. And I did see Miriam on the line today participating and asking questions, and CRB. And, you know, really, we wouldn't be able to run programs like these without the support of our sponsors. So I thank all of them for the ongoing support they've given us, especially in these challenging times. It's all that more important. I want to thank all of you for attending in this evening's session. I hope that we were able to help and assist you as you're looking to launch your career, or if you're an employer looking at best practices. As I said, it seems like there was a lot of interest in this panel, so hopefully we can do something more here to continue this dialogue. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Have a great evening, everyone. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye.